صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه.
Recite the Ziyarat Ashura on Laylatul Jumu'ah to pledge our allegiance and to convey our salams to Maulana Sayyid al-Shuhada Imam Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam. Recite this ziyarah on our behalf, on behalf of our family members, relatives, friends, marhumin and marhumat, shuhada in the path of Ali Muhammad. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله. السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله. السلام عليك يا خيرة الله وابن خيرته. السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين وابن سيد الوصيين. السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام عليك يا ثار الله وابن ثاره والوتر الموتور. السلام عليك وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليكم مني سلام الله أبدا. عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار. يا أبا عبد الله لقد عظمت الرزية وجلت وعظمت المصيبة بك علينا وعلى جميع أهل الإسلام. وجلت وعظمت مصيبتك في السماوات على جميع أهل السماوات. فلعن الله أمة أسست أساس الظلم والجور عليكم أهل البيت. ولعن الله أمة دفعتكم عن مقامكم وأزالتكم عن مراتبكم التي رتبكم الله فيها. ولعن الله أمة قتلتكم. ولعن الله الممهدين لهم بالتمكين من قتالكم. برئت إلى الله وإليكم منهم ومن أشيائهم وأتباعهم وأوليائهم. يا أبا عبد الله إني سلم لمن سالمكم وحرب لمن حاربكم إلى يوم القيامة. ولعن الله آل زياد وآل مروان. ولعن الله بني أمية قاتبة. ولعن الله ابن مرجانة. ولعن الله عمر بن سعد. ولعن الله الشمراء. ولعن الله أمة أسرجت وألجمت وتنقبت لقتالك. بأبي أنت وأمي لقد عظم مصابي بك. فأسأل الله الذي أكرم مقامك وأكرمني بك أن يرزقني طلب ثارك مع إمام منشور من أهل بيت محمد صلى الله عليه وآله. اللهم اجعلني عندك وجيها بالحسين عليه السلام في الدنيا والآخرة. يا أبا عبد الله، إني أتقرب إلى الله وإلى رسوله وإلى أمير المؤمنين وإلى فاطمة وإلى الحسن وإليك بموالاتك وبالبراءة ممن قاتلك ونصب لك الحرب، وبالبراءة ممن أسس أساس الظلم والجور عليكم، وأتبرأ إلى الله وإلى رسوله ممن أسس أساس ذلك وبنى عليه بنيانا وجرى في ظلمه وجوره عليكم وعلى أشيائكم. برئت إلى الله وإليكم منهم، وأتقرب إلى الله ثم إليكم بموالاتكم وموالاة وليكم وبالبراءة من أعدائكم والناصبين لكم الحرب، وبالبراءة من أشيائهم وأتباعهم. إني سلم لمن سالمكم وحرب لمن حاربكم وولي لمن والاكم وعدو لمن عاداكم. فأسأل الله الذي أكرمني بمعرفتكم ومعرفة أوليائكم ورزقني البراءة من أعدائكم أن يجعلني معكم في الدنيا والآخرة، وأن يثبت لي عندكم قدم صدق في الدنيا والآخرة، وأسأله أن يبلغني المقام المحمود لكم عند الله، وأن يرزقني طلب ثاري مع إمام مهدي الهدى ظاهر ناطق بالحق منكم. وأسأل الله بحقكم وبالشأن الذي لكم عنده أن يعطيني بمصابيبكم أفضل ما يؤتي مصابا بمصيبته، مصيبة ما أعظمها وأعظم رزيتها في الإسلام وفي جميع السماوات والأرض. اللهم اجعلني في مقام هذا ممن تناله منك صلوات ورحمة ومغفرة. اللهم اجعل محياي محيا محمد وآل محمد ومماتي ممات محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إن هذا يوم تبركت به بنو أمية وابن آكلة الأكبر اللعين ابن اللعين على لسانك ولسان نبيك صلى الله عليه وآله، في كل موطن وموقف وقف فيه نبيك صلى الله عليه وآله. اللهم لعن أبا سفيان ومعاوية ويزيد بن معاوية عليهم منك اللعنة أبد العابدين. وهذا يوم فرحت به آل زياد وآل مروان بقتلهم الحسين صلوات الله عليه. اللهم فضائف عليهم اللعن منك والعذاب الأليم. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك في هذا اليوم وفي موقف هذا وأيام حياتي بالبراءة منهم واللعنة عليهم وبالموالاة لنبيك وآل نبيك عليه وعليهم السلام. اللهم لعن أول ظالم ظلم حق محمد وآل محمد وآخر تابع له على ذلك. اللهم لعن العصابة التي جاهدت الحسين وشايعت وبايعت وتابعت على قتله. اللهم لعنهم جميعا. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. اللهم خص أنت أول ظالم باللعن مني وابدأ به أولا ثم لعن الثاني والثالث والرابع. اللهم لعن يزيد خامسا ولعن عبيد الله ابن زياد وابن مرجانة وعمر بن سعد والشمرة وآل أبي سفيان وآل زياد وآل مروان إلى يوم القيامة. اللهم لك الحمد حمد الشاكرين لك على مصابهم. الحمد لله على عظيم رزيتي. اللهم ارزقني شفاعة الحسين يوم الورود وثبت لي قدم صدق عندك مع الحسين وأصحاب الحسين الذين بذلوا مهجهم دون الحسين عليه السلام. Ya Allah, by the sake of Abba Abdullah, Ya Allah, never dry up my tears for the grief of Abba Abdullah. Ya Allah, by the sake of Sayyid al-Shuhada, have mercy on us Forgive us our sins and guide us towards the path of Iman and Taqwa. Ya Allah, by the sake of Sayyid al-Shuhada, do not deny us entry into Jannah in the company of Ali Muhammad on the day of reckoning and in paradise for eternity. Inna Allah wa malaikatahu yusalluna ala nabi. يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه. برائے تجلیل ظہور امام زمانہ بلند کر صلوات. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
يكون صلوات على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
ہے بابا تیری زہرا پہ مصیبت کی کلی ہے بابا تیری زہرا پہ مصیبت کی کلی ہے کیسے دروازہ ہٹاؤں کیسے دروازہ ہٹاؤں کیسے محسن کو بچاؤں سانس سینے میں رکی ہے تیری زہرا پہ مصیبت کی کلی ہے اے بابا تیری زہرا پہ مصیبت کی کلی ہے تیری امت نے بنا دی ہے یہ حالت بابا ہے کوئی پسلی بھی نہیں میری سلامت بابا سانس لیتی ہوں میں جس دم گھٹن لگتا ہے میرا دم صرف مرنے کی کمی ہے تیری زہرا پہ مصیبت کی کلی ہے اے بابا تیری زہرا پہ مصیبت کلی ہاتھ میں جس کے میرا ہاتھ دیا تھا تم نے کہ من کن تو جسے مولا کہا تھا تم نے میں نے ہر موت پہ بابا ساتھ اس کا ہے نبھایا ہاں میرا جرم یہی ہے تیری زہرا پہ مصیبت کی کڑی ہے اے بابا تیری زہرا پہ مصیبت کی کڑی ہے شرم آتی ہے بھلا تم کو بتاؤں کیسے یہ تماچوں کے نشاں تم کو دکھاؤں کیسے تم نہ پہچان سکو گے دیکھ کر مجھ کو کہو گے کیا میری زہرا یہی ہے تیری زہرا پہ مصیبت کی کڑی ہے اے بابا تیری زہرا پہ مصیبت کی کڑی ہے صلوات علی محمد وآل محمد خاموشی ہے آج یہ کیسی شام کے زندہ میں خاموشی ہے آج یہ کیسی شام کے زندہ میں رونے والی کیوں نہیں روتی رونے والی کیوں نہیں روتی شام کے زندہ میں خاموشی ہے آج یہ کیسی شام کے زندہ ڈوب گئی ہے کیوں وہ صدائیں بابا بابا کی کیا اب زخمی کانوں میں تکلیف نہیں ہوتی ایسی خاموشی تو نہیں تھی ایسی خاموشی تو نہیں تھی شام کے زندہ میں خاموشی ہے آج یہ کیسی شام کے زندہ
فیض کے اندر کس کی لحد سجاد بناتے ہیں خون بھرے کرتے میں کسے مٹی میں سلاتے ہیں کس کی روح نے پائی رہائی شام کے زندانی خاموشی ہے آج یہ کیسی شام کے زندانی پانی مانگنے والی بچی کیوں کر ہے خاموش کیا زخمی کانوں کی دکھن سے ہو گئی وہ بے ہوش راہ چچا کی کیوں نہیں تکتی راہ چچا کی کیوں نہیں تکتی شام کے زندہ میں خاموشی ہے آج یہ کیسی شام کے زندہ میں محمد وآل محمد صلوات I request you all to recite 5 times Amun Yujib before all those who are sick and in need of our du'as. Bismillah ar-Rahman
Before we begin, let us remember our marhumin and our marhumat and all of those who have passed away on the love and the wilayat of Amir al-Mu'mineen with Surah al-Mubarakat al-Fatiha. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله بارئ الخلائق الأجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء حبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
ثم الصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين لا سيما ولي الله الحجة ابن الحسن صاحب الأمر والزمان
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين وعلى منكري فضائلهم وغاصبي حقوقهم من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين آمين رب العالمين. صلى الله عليك يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله. صلى الله عليك يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله. يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة. يا غريب الغرباء يا مظلوم كربلاء السلام على من جعل الله الشفاء في تربته. السلام على من الإجابة تحت قبته. السلام على ساكن كربلاء. فيا ليتنا ثم يا ليتنا وكنا معكم سادتي. يا سادتي فنفوز فوزا عليما. أما بعد، قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الحكيم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول وأولي الأمر منكم. صدق الله العلي العظيم وآمنا به. نوروا مجالسكم بذكر محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أحبائي, the majlis of 8th of Rabiul Awwal is a majlis that is very dear to the heart. And into mu'mineen from 1st of Shahr Muharram, over 60 days, 70 days, you have immersed yourself in the grief of Ali Muhammad. And you find that our grief remains eternal in our hearts. Even though the calendar year, the 8th of Rabiul Awwal, is the last day of grief, and with Farhatul Zahra begins the days of happiness. On a calendar basis, and the hadith of the Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq, Ruhi lahul Fida,
اللهم صل على محمد وآل
where he says, from the sifat of our Shia, from the characteristics of our Shia, يَفْرَحُونَ لِفَرْحِنَا وَيَحْزَنُونَ لِحُزْنِنَا. Our Shias are those who celebrate in occasions of our happiness, and our Shias are those who weep and commemorate grief on the days of our grief. For the day of 9th Rabiul Awwal, Farhatul Zahra, is the official day of the removal of black clothes. This is the hadith of Amir alayhi salam. For 8th of Rabiul Awwal marks, from a calendar basis, the last day of Azah. And you find that this is special for a number of reasons. Because this is an Azah that is marked for the Azah of the master of our time, Maulana Sahib al-Amri wa Zaman. And this Azah for the Imam of our time, who will seek vengeance for Abu Abdullah. For the Majlis, first Muharram begins with the Madlumiyat of Sayyid al-Shuhada. And today we commemorate on the grief of the one who will avenge for Sayyid al-Shuhada. And it becomes my responsibility, following in line with our teachers, ulama, maraja within the Hawza Ilmiya, to pray and to thank each and every one of you for your participation in the grief of Imam al-Hussein. Siddiq Shabab Khasatan over here, from 1st of Shahr al-Muharram, attend 2 majalis in a night, perform matam twice in a night. The next day they go to work shattered and tired, and they come back again and again and again. They remember with the Shabab, some of them who sit here till 1 in the morning, till 2 in the morning. The next day there's Salatul Fajr and there's work. You sit and you think, what drives a person to be so tired and to be so dead and put himself through this and still come for the majlis over and over? I speak to any one of the Shabab, I'll tell you it's this love for Imam al-Hussein that just brings us here. And this tiredness, Wallahi al-Azim, a qasam on the member of Imam al-Hussein, this tiredness does not go unnoticed by Imam al-Hussein. Tiredness, participation. After that, Shabab went for ziyarah for Imam al-Hussein. And with the tiredness and the heat, and we have very little to complain about. The fact that people left behind their families and their children and their wives. I said, they've left the child at home and the child misses the father. Why are you doing this? Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. And as the ulama would say, to express gratitude to a congregation that worked together to uphold the dhikr of Imam al-Hussein is from the wajibat. And inshallah, I pray to Allah Azza wa Jal for each and every one of you and for your families that all your du'as and all your hajat may be accepted, inshallah. May you be protected from every sort of su and bala, and may this grief and this love for Ali Muhammad continue in our hearts and in the hearts of our families for generations and generations to come. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه.
I invite you to understand the value and the worth, if you can use these two words, to understand the value, the worth, or rather to understand the weight of the responsibility of Imam Hasan al-Askari when it came to executing the duties of Imamate. It is absolutely necessary for us, number one, to analyze and understand the circumstances and the context in which Imam al-Askari conducted the role of Imamate. Whenever you want to see, by way of example, and I try to come up with as many examples to contextualize for us to understand the circumstance of Imam al-Askari and Imam al-Hadi. You want to understand, by way of example, how good, for example, a football player is. You will be able to analyze the skill of a player in the context of the team in which he plays. If a person is always surrounded with good players, for example, a striker who is backed with a good midfield, with a good support system, and is always scoring goals, you say this one is somebody normal. But if you have a striker, for example, who is surrounded by teammates who are sub-level, who are below par, but he goes above and beyond to create the opportunities, to rally together the team and then scores, you say this one is exceptional over somebody else. Similarly, when it comes to business, for example, when it comes to trade, for example, a person who is able to turn over profit, for example, in an economy that is already flourishing, is a normal trader, is a normal businessman. For a person who is able to turn over profit or build a business at times of difficulty in economy, this is where you are able to distinguish true entrepreneurship from normal entrepreneurship. Yani, the summary, the harder the circumstances a person operates during in his life, the harder the circumstances, the more you are able to tell who shines, who is superior, and who is normal. Student who studies under all normal conditions, he doesn't have to worry about food, doesn't have to worry about electricity, doesn't have to worry about getting killed on the way to school. If he was to study and he scores 90% in an exam, as opposed to another student who doesn't have access to electricity, father, mother doesn't earn enough money to put food on the table, in hunger, in darkness, and on the way to school might get killed, also comes to the exam and scores a 90. Taban, you will say the person who scored a 90 under difficult circumstances deserves greater accreditation than the one who studied under normal circumstances. If we understand this in the same manner, with the same line of thought, with the same context, we come to analyze the context and the circumstances under which Imam al-Askari executed the office and the role of Imamate. Have a look by way of context. Sirah tells us, and historians bear witness, that Bani Abbas, la'anahumullah, moved their capital from the city of Baghdad to the city of Samarra. Samarra was a military garrison. And for those of us who are blessed to go to Samarra, and may Allah Azza wa Jal grant everyone the opportunity to visit Samarra multiple times during the year, inshallah. And those of you who have been to Samarra, the picture of the city of Samarra can come into your mind. Samarra was a military garrison, an entire city that was built as a military base. What did Bani Abbas do? Their capital was in the city of Baghdad, Baghdad, if you think about it in today's terms, cosmopolitan city, the capital of the Islamic Empire, that is equivalent to almost 60 present-day countries from the Middle East and Asia and North Africa and so on and so forth. Bani Abbas's empire was equivalent to 60 present-day countries. The capital of this entire empire is the city of Baghdad. Yani the city of Baghdad, metropolitan. City of Baghdad is where all the diplomats come, where all, you would say, foreign embassies. And when we say foreign embassies at that time, you had people from the Roman Empire who would come to visit, from different delegations from Africa, delegations that would come from Europe, all come to visit Bani Abbas and the emperors of Bani Abbas. So Baghdad as a capital city, even at that time, was a city that had great i'tibar. The dwellers of Baghdad were exceptional because it is a capital city. It is also the center of trade because it is a capital city. Baytul Mal, yani the central bank, was based in Baghdad. And you can imagine khums and zakat from 60 different present-day countries, all being directed into the city of Baghdad. How the city of Baghdad might be like any other capital city in the world. To understand Imam al-Askari's time, it is absolutely important for us to contextualize politics and geography as per today's day and age. You have a look at the city of Baghdad. The central bank is there. Diplomats. How do you have a capital city of any country today? You look at the functions and the khususiyat, the distinctions of a capital, the capital city of any country. All of this in Baghdad. The emperor, Bani Abbas, moves the capital city of this empire, which is 60 countries big, into a military base. Shay'un ajib and gharib. You research history, research political history, research history of countries. I don't think you will find in human recorded history that any empire has been under such great threat that they moved the entire capital city to the confines of a military base. Rather, they built the city of Samarra as a military base. To give you context on this, look inside of Canada. The biggest, or one of the biggest military bases in Canada is where? Is a camp, if I'm not mistaken, known as Suffolk or Suffolk in Alberta. The biggest military base in Canada, or one of the biggest military bases in Canada. Country takes pride. It's the biggest base, 40 kilometers long. Spent billions of dollars to build the base. Imagine if the country came under such threat, military threat, that they had to move the entire capital city together with the government offices and the parliament and everything. They moved it from Ottawa and confined themselves into this army base in Suffolk in Alberta. Country would be in a state of emergency. Sahirola, imagine the prime minister, all the ministers, cabinet, everyone operating from inside of a military base. And not even the military base is not equivalent to the entire province of Alberta. It's only 40 kilometers long. So say 40 by 40, 160 square or 1,600 square kilometers, or whatever the math works out to. And yet it's the biggest military base. But imagine if the country moved to this state, we'll be in a state of emergency. That means the country is under threat there is a looming threat of an invasion. And even when there is going to be an invasion or there is a threat to a government, what usually happens? The president of the country has bunkers underneath the White House. They don't move capital cities to a military base. Bani Abbas during the time of Imam Hasan and Askari were under such fear, and the threat of their empire being taken over or crumbling down was so great, they migrated the entire capital with all government functions into a new city that was particularly built as a military base. What did they fear in Imam al-Askari and Imam al-Hadi such that they made such a drastic move? What threat did Imam al-Hadi and Imam al-Askari pose to Bani Abbas such that they entered into this? They moved the capital into a military base, and moreover, they imprisoned Imam al-Hadi and Imam al-Askari in this military base. A city which is particularly built as a military base, number one. Imam al-Hadi and Imam al-Askari imprisoned in them. And as if this was not enough, not only did they isolate Imam al-Askari from the rest of his Shias by imprisoning him in a city, which is a military base, but in addition to that, they kept him under house arrest. So in a city which is a military base, you have a house, and inside of that house, you are under house arrest. And if that was not enough, even though Imam al-Askari was under house arrest, he was subject to random house inspections. Without any search warrant, without anything. The army, because there's no police, Baba, the army would, it's a military garrison, it's a military base, there's no police, there's army. The army would barge and break into the house of Imam al-Askari multiple times and conduct what we say in this day and age, raids. Have you seen a military raid in the house? Have you seen on television or in anything? When there is a military raid, they don't come and knock the door politely. They are armed to the teeth, they break down your front door, they surround your house, and they raid your house. Imam al-Askari, despite being under house arrest inside of a military base, his house was raided by commandos and military operations multiple times. If this was not enough, Imam al-Askari, in addition to being subject, his house being subject to military raids, in the middle of the night, they would raid his house, arrest him, and imprison him. And I think about this. Imagine enter you with your family, living here in Canada. If the military or a branch of the military was to raid your house, the trauma and the fear on you and in your family. Imam al-Askari lived through this. Imagine that Allah keep all of us safe. You're in your house, a military raid, and the family of member of yours is abducted, taken to jail, and taken to prison, and there is no news. You can't go to the army, you can't go to the police station, you can't file a complaint, you can't do anything. Do you know how many times Imam al-Askari was dragged out of his house by military commandos, and no one in the house has any news of where he is? People who have migrated from war-torn countries, people who have migrated from third world countries will be able to tell you the qalaq, the anxiety and the fear. A person can die from fear like this. Imam al-Askari lived through this. What was his age? Age of 28. He was poisoned at the age of 28. And if this wasn't enough, Not only did they imprison him, and you know, a military prison is very different than a civilian prison. Prison for a police that is manned and controlled by the police for petty thefts, for petty crimes, for traffic light crime and this and that. Those jail conditions are very, very different than from the condition of a prison which is manned by the military. Prisons that are manned by the military are reserved for those individuals that are perceived to be a threat to national security. Sahih. So their treatment is very different than for those convicts in a civilian jail. Imam al-Askari was subject to imprisonment in a military jail, which is why, may Allah give all of us the tawfiq. Shabab, we went this time, we didn't have an opportunity, inshallah, the year after. In Samarra, from the Haram of Imam al-Askari, Ruhi Lahul Fida, about 5 or 7 kilometers from the Haram of Imam al-Askari into the city of Samarra, there is the prison of Imam al-Hadi. There is an area known as the prison of Imam al-Hadi. It's the prison of Imam Hadi and Imam al-Askari. And right next to the prison, there is remains of the castle and the palace of Bani Abbas, of Mutawakkil and Mu'tamid alayhi wa la'ana. And there is a remains of the area. It looks like a coliseum where they threw Imam al-Askari so that he could get devoured and eaten by the lions. But when Imam al-Askari was thrown there, the lions actually did sajda to him. This area is still marked 5 to 7 kilometers from the Haram of Imam al-Askari alayhi salam. Over there is the prison of Imam al-Hadi and Imam al-Askari. Inshallah, Allah give us the tawfiq one day to visit. But if you were to go and you were to look at the prison of Imam al-Hadi, last year we had the tawfiq to go. When you go down to visit, the prison is at least 15 feet under the ground. 15 to 20 feet under the ground. When you go when you go 15 feet deep into the ground, we found that there is a hole. It is called a tamura. Tamura is a hole in the ground. When I went with one of the mu'mineen last year, when we actually showed the prison, when he showed the prison, the hole in the ground, he said, Sheikh, now we've come to a well. Allahu Akbar. He thought it was a well. When you look closer, it says the tamura. It was a dungeon in the ground that was dug such that Imam al-Hadi and Imam al-Askari would be imprisoned in isolation in what looks like a well 15 to 20 feet underneath the ground. Do you see in a military prison, they have cells that are for solitary confinement. Have you seen this? The person is locked in a single room. That room is a 6x6 room. You can't speak to anyone, you can't talk to anyone. These shaitan got these ideas from nowhere. They have learned from Bani Abbas. And they have learned from those before Bani Abbas. This jail of Imam al-Askari, which was an underground prison, the size of a well, military confinement, 20 feet underneath the ground, in a hole which is the size of a well. Wallah, you cannot stand, you cannot sit, you cannot turn right, you cannot turn left. Imam al-Askari was imprisoned in this. Why did they fear him? To be subject to this level of imprisonment. The fear of Bani Abbas was because, one of the reasons was because, reason number one, was because of the popularity and the spread of the hadith that foretold the prophecy of the coming of Maulana Sahibul Amri wa Zaman, اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه. This hadith on authority of Rasulullah that the Mahdi is from my lineage. Alladhi, which Mahdi? Alladhi yamla'ul arda adlan wa qistan kama muli'at dhulman wa jawra. This Mahdi is my son who will fill the earth with peace and justice, just like the way it has been filled with injustice and oppression. And Bani Abbas knew from the hadith of Rasulullah that this is the 12th Imam. And they understood Imam al-Hadi is the 10th and Imam al-Askari is the 11th. So they knew the coming of the Mahdi is very close. Bani Abbas also knew if the Mahdi is going to rise and establish a government of truth and establish a government of peace and justice by removing the government of oppression and dhulm, Bani Abbas knew they are guilty. They knew that they are the government of dhulm. They knew they are the government of oppression. And if the Mahdi raises, he is going to come and eradicate and break down their entire empire. Which is why, out of this fear, number one, they fortified themselves into a military base. They built a city in its entirety, Samarra, 130 kilometers away from Baghdad, the capital. They built a city and they converted it to a military base. To understand this, even if you were to go on the net, go on YouTube, see how a military base is built. In Afghanistan, recently, they broke down military bases before they left. See how a military base is just deconstructed. It will give you an idea of what Samarra was back in the day. An entire city. This is not even a base that is 40 kilometers long, 40 kilometers wide. An entire city. They were absolutely terrified with the hadith of the coming of the Mahdi. They knew the Mahdi is coming. And they knew that they have stolen the right of Ahlul Bayt. They just didn't know where he is, when he is coming. So they panicked and they went into defense on this side. Do you know Bani Abbas remained in Samarra for almost 40 years after the death of Imam Hasan al-Askari, before they became a little bit satisfied. Mahdi is no more around us because Imam went into Ghaiba for 40 years. They remained, the capital of an empire remained inside of a military base. After 40 years, they got a little bit of confidence and they moved their capital back into Baghdad. So number one, the fear of the Mahdi pushed them to take these stances. Number one. Number two, Bani Abbas were under threat that their empire is slipping away from their control and slipping away from their grip because of the extent to which Tashayyu or Shiaism was spreading across the entire Islamic nation. Shiaism was growing at such a fast rate, at an exceedingly fast rate, that Bani Abbas themselves were not able to keep up with this rate of Tashayyu. Do you know what is the thing that is ajib? Shiaism was growing at a rate that was exponentially high, even though officially the madhab was in a state of taqiyya. And from here we understand, taqiyya does not mean, when we say taqiyya, conceal your faith, doesn't mean abandon your faith. You are concealing it at the surface so that underneath the faith will spread faster than what it would openly. Do you know, the rate of Shiaism had grown to such an extent. Imam al-Askari had Shias. Leave Shias. In addition to Shias, he had wukala, yani he had wakils, intermediaries, men of authority to administer the affair of the Shias.
The Imam had Shias in the city of Baghdad. Baghdad was the base of Shiaism. From the time of Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam all the way until the early days of Ghaibatul Kubra. Baghdad was the base of Shiaism. Majority of our greatest scholars, like the way we saw in the city of Qadbay, hailed from Baghdad. Sheikh Kulaini, Sayyid Murtada, Sharif al-Radi, Sheikh Mufid. Before them, the 4 naibs of the 12th Imam from Baghdad, buried inside of Baghdad. Greatest companions of Imam al-Jawad and Imam al-Rida, residents of Baghdad. Madinatul Salam it was. So the Imam had Shias in Baghdad. The Imam had Shias across Iraq, in Anbar, in Sinjar, in Mosul, in Kufa. Imam had Shias in Hijaz, in Medina, and in Mecca. Imam had Shias in places as far as Kabul and Tajikistan. Imam had Shias in Jarjan next to the Caspian Sea, leading into what would be considered today former Soviet territory like Turkmenistan and Azerbaijan. The hadith narrates that Imam had Shias and his wakils were active there. More than that, Imam had Shias in North Africa. Do you know the mother of our 11th Imam, the mother of Imam Hasan al-Askari, was a pious lady by the name of Sayyidah Sawzan. Sayyidah Sawzan like Susan. The Arabic version of the name Susan Sawzan. Sayyidah Sawzan, the mother of Imam Hasan al-Askari, Ruhi lahul Fida, was a lady from where? From Nubia. Nubia is where? The area south of Egypt and north of Sudan. Allah, where there were pious women of Tahara, selected and purified by Allah in order to be the mother of a Ma'soom Imam in a place like Nubia. Ajib wa Gharib. The Imam had clout, the Imam had influence, and Bani Abbas knew this. When you go to Samarra, or when you come across history and you read that the Imam was imprisoned in a military garrison, it wasn't just a normal thing. The Imams had made feats and achievements, and this is how our faith got to us. The fear of Bani Abbas, number one, was the fear of the Mahdi. The fear of the rise of Shiaism at an uncontrollable rate across the entire Islamic nation. More than that, Shiaism was not only spreading amongst the people. Some of the highest members of the government were influenced and became Shia because of their exposure to Imam al-Askari. Not only normal government officials, some of the highest military commanders in the army of Bani Abbas converted to Shia. So when you have a government that is built on the enmity of Ali Muhammad, when your top officials within the army become Shia, what do you think the state of the emperor is? Sirah tells us, look at this. Imam al-Askari, Ruhi lahul Fida, was imprisoned. So there were multiple jails. As we said, his house would be raided at night by commandos. He's abducted and he's put into prison. Sometimes below the earth, sometimes in this prison, sometimes in that prison. He was imprisoned. The military commander in charge of manning that prison appointed 2 field officers. He says, your job is to torture Imam al-Askari. And every day, I want a report of how you have tortured him. Or when I return, I want a report of how you have tortured him. Solitary confinement in a military prison with 2 commandos to torture you. Weeks later, the commander comes back. Field officers to report to him. Now look at the hierarchy that was there. This is how tyrants work. You have got the military commander. He's got underneath him 2 field officers. But while he was away, this commander has employed another personnel of the army to spy on these 2 people. Are they torturing Imam al-Askari properly or not? So when he returned back the commander, he goes to the spy and he says, did these 2 field officers torture Ibn Rida? Because they used to call Imam al-Askari Ibn Rida, the son of Rida. The spy says, these days and age, sir, the opposite happened. Like when you meet these 2 people who you brought in to torture Imam al-Askari have become his companions. They pray behind him. They fast with him. They break their fast with him. The commander says, these 2 people I brought to torture Imam al-Askari, men, leave religion. They didn't know how to pray. They were men who didn't know anything about religion. Men who had no mercy. In a matter of 1 month, they were sent to torture Imam al-Askari. They ended up becoming Shias of Imam al-Askari. Where do you find this happening? One of these 2 field officers was interrogated. Said, why did you become? How did you become a person who prays and loves Imam al-Askari? Do you know from the answer, and this is a lecture on its own, from the answer, the person says, the haiba of the Imam. Haiba yani the grandeur. You know, sometimes when you meet a person, you can feel that aura emanating from them. I give you an example because into Zawar of Imam al-Hussein. Do you remember when you enter into the haram of Amir al-Mu'mineen? When you enter the haram of Imam al-Hussein? When you look at the dhari for the first time, what happens? You are overcome with emotion and you start crying and you start weeping. Or come and I tell you, Baba, you haven't even seen the Imam. You are looking at the dhari that marks the place in which the Imam was buried. If that dhari, if that Kubba can have such an impact on you, imagine what would happen to you if you were to see the Imam live in person. Shabab were walking together. After 3 days of walking, they looked at the Kubba of Abul Fadil Abbas for the first time. Some of the brothers almost fainted out of grief. I said, this is the Kubba, it's not the Imam himself. Imagine if you were to see the Imam yourself. Haiba overtook these people. They became Shias of Imam al-Askari. This is number 2. The spread of Shiaism at an exponentially fast rate got Bani Abbas to panic. Number 3. See, Bani Abbas feared Imam al-Askari so much, and they feared Imam al-Mahdi for what Ahlul Bayt represented. The only authority of Allah on earth. The only ones who are the representatives of the deen and the religion. This is why they feared Ahlul Bayt. Do you know, in addition to this imprisonment, Bani Abbas embarked upon a massive propaganda campaign to promote alternate schools of thoughts and alternate madhabs and sects that would come to counter the teachings of Imam al-Askari and Ali Muhammad, Bani Abbas propagated and funded them. And I don't say this from a sectarian perspective. I say this from a perspective of haqq. Look at Sahih Muslim. Look at Sahih Bukhari. When were these two books authored? Have you seen how these two books are bigged in the environment in which we live? Say Sahih. Whatever you find in Bukhari, whatever you find in Muslim, it's taken as gospel. Sahih Lola. This is not only now, for years. Do you know when these two books were compiled? They were compiled during the life of Imam al-Hadi and Imam al-Askari. Propagated, funded, and spread across the Muslim lands. Go and publicize these books, make them mainstream teachings of the Muslims. Over here you have Imam al-Askari. If he says to you, Qala Rasulullah, he's thrown into a military prison, military garrison in a prison 20 feet underneath the ground because he shared one hadith of Rasulullah. Over here, Bukhari and Muslim write hadith of Rasulullah. They are funded and they are spread across the Islamic nation. Where did they get traction? Where did they get publicity from? During the time of Bani Abbas. Why were they promoted? Why were they funded? Over here, somebody, Imam al-Askari says, Qala Rasulullah, he gets imprisoned. Over here, Bukhari says, Qala Rasulullah, he gets funded and the books are spread. Why? We have to ask ourselves. Bani Abbas funded Bukhari and Muslim so that they become the mainstream sources of understanding Islam and not Ahlul Bayt. It was to fund an alternate to the source of guidance. Who said you need Hadi and Askari when we have Bukhari and Muslim? This is what it boils down to. Until today. Do you know, it was during the time of Bani Abbas that majority of the books of Indian and Greek philosophy were translated from Hindi and from Greek into Arabic. Some juhal, ignorant people, they call this, starting from the Orientalists. The Orientalists categorized this period because it started from the time of Imam Rida and peaked to the time of Imam al-Askari. They labeled this time as the golden age of Islam. Even if you were to Google this, you'll be surprised at the garbage and the filth that people buy into. Try it, Google it. The golden age of Islam during the time of Bani Abbas. And subhanallah, you see how historians praise Bani Abbas for this golden age. Because why? They say this is when the Muslim empire entered into the peak of cultural and civilizational growth. Tayyib, what is your scale of cultural and civilizational growth? The translation and the exchange of Greek and Indian literature in philosophy. Unfortunately, our own people, Shias of Ali Muhammad, ignorant Shias, come and they tell us, don't condemn Bani Abbas because this is what they contributed. The translation of Greek and Indian philosophy, and this is how knowledge evolved and Muslim thinkers came to grow. Anyone who knows the basics of philosophy, who has studied the basics of philosophy, rewind into all this. What was Bani Abbas's interest in having Greek and Indian philosophy translated into Arabic? What was their interest? Rewind back to the basics of philosophy. Do you know what the basics of philosophy is? The basics of philosophy as a science is an attempt to understand and to answer questions on the reality of existence and the reality of afterlife and the realm of spirituality that exists outside the domain of this universe. Your entire basics of philosophy consist of these three. The reality of existence before this earth or before this universe, and the reality of existence after this universe. Do you know what this is? Tawheed and Ma'ad, Akhirah. Reality of existence includes the research of the existence of how this universe came into existence. Does there exist a creator or not? What are the natures of that creator? And what happens to the human being after death? Because they didn't want Ahlul Bayt to be the sole authority when it comes to understanding Tawheed and Ma'ad, they brought the philosophy of the atheists such that it is a counter truth to the truth taught by Imam Askari. Enter when you want to know the reality of existence. When you have an Imam who existed before existence, tell you about existence. You go to Fulan and Fulan of Greek mythology. Who understands the reality of this earth before it was created, other than somebody who is divinely appointed by Allah? Greek mythology is nothing but a fancy sugar-coated science of speculation. You cannot know the reality. You cannot know the reality of existence unless you are divinely inspired by that Lord who created existence. Simple. This is how people fall into the narrative. This is what Imam Askari was in prison for. Kalam is great on this. They imprisoned Imam Askari. They promoted and funded alternate truths, alternate sources of being to sideline and bypass Imam Askari. But despite that, Imam Askari was still a threat to them. And they decided to poison him. Imam was martyred at the age of 28. Do you know Imam al-Askari's imamate is the shortest period of imamate compared to any other imam? Imam al-Askari's imamate lasted only for 6 years. Go check every other imam. How long the period of imamate was? Imam al-Askari only 6. This is the level of threat that he posed to Bani Abbas. The narrations mention, Sheikh Mufid Rahmatullah alayhi mentions that Imam al-Askari was administered with poison on the 1st of Rabiul Awwal. And the Imam was martyred on the 8th of Rabiul Awwal. During the time of Fajr, Imam became Shaheed. For 8 days, the Imam suffered the pangs, the tribulations, and the pains of poison. Shabbat. Tonight is the last Bursa and the last Azan. Bear with me if this Masaib is long. This is a Masaib in which we have to give condolences to Imam al-Hujjah. And you find inside the Masaib of Imam Hasan al-Askari, there is the Masaib of Ahlul Bayt in its entirety. In this Masaib of Imam Hasan al-Askari, you will see the Masaib of Karbala open up in front of you. Allah, Allah. The narrations mention that Bani Abbas poisoned Imam Hasan al-Askari on the 1st of Rabiul Awwal. The Imam straight away began to feel the pangs of poison inside of his body. The poison was such that it began to take its toll on the Imam, and it began to become more and more severe as the days passed by. The narrations mention that by the time of the 8th of Rabiul Awwal, on a night like this, the poison had such an effect, the body of the entire the Imam was in a state of pain. The pain of the Imam was so intense such that he would raise one leg and put it down and raise the other leg and put it down out of pain. Have you seen when somebody's in pain, how they raise the legs up and down out of grief? Imam al-Askari was moving his legs up and down out of grief. Allah, Allah, ya Shiat Ali Muhammad. When I read this in the Maktal, Imam al-Askari moving his legs up and down out of pain. In my mind comes the Masa'ib of Shah Qasim on the day of Ashura. When the enemy struck Shah Qasim at the back of the head with a sword, Shah Qasim fell down to the ground. Do you know when they struck Shah Qasim and he fell down? The Maktal mentions Fawaka'a ala wajhi. He fell on the plains of Karbala face first. When Shah Qasim fell down, he didn't cry out, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. When he fell down, Shah Qasim cried out, Adrikni ya Amma. Shah Qasim cried out, help me, oh my uncle. The Maktal mentions Imam al-Hussein went charging into the Maktal. The enemy panicked, so they began to scatter in every direction. As they scattered, they trampled on the body of Qasim. Allah. Maktal says, when the sand settled down, they saw Imam al-Hussein sitting by the chest of Shah Qasim. What was Shah Qasim doing? Shah Qasim was moving his legs up and down out of pain. Allah, Allah, ya Imam Hasan al-Askari, your Masaib reminds me of the Masaib of Shah Qasim. Imam al-Askari moving his legs up and down out of pain, and turning sometimes towards the right and turning towards the left. The narrations mention that the heat inside the body of Imam al-Askari, as the poison began to take its effect, the temperature of Imam al-Askari began to rise. He felt extreme heat, and with extreme heat, a person feels extreme thirst. Allah, Allah. The narrations mention he looked towards the side. Sayyida Narjis alayha salam, the wife of Imam al-Askari, mother of Imam al-Hujjah, she was standing on the side of the room. He turned towards her and he said to her, oh Narjis, is there any water? For indeed the heat of the poison, the thirst is killing me. Allah, Allah. Ya Imam al-Askari, the poison that caused thirst in your body reminds me of the thirst of your grandfather, Abu Abdullah. Ya Imam al-Askari, when you called out for water due to your thirst, I remember the cries of the children, Al-Atash, Al-Atash. And I remember how Sayyida Ruqayya sat with her bowl in front of the Kaibaga, waiting for her uncle Abbas to come back. Allah, Allah. Ya Imam al-Askari, the narrations mention that a bowl of water was brought for Imam al-Askari. The servant in the house brought a bowl of water for Imam al-Askari. When Imam al-Askari took the bowl of water, he tried to drink from the water. The narration mentioned the poison made Imam al-Askari so weak. His hands were trembling. He was not able to hold the bowl of water, so he would try to bring it to his mouth. Imam al-Askari was not able to. At this moment, Sayyida Narjis called out to her son Imam al-Hujjah, Waladi ya Mahdi. Oh my son Mahdi, come and help your father drink some water. Do you know what the narration mentions? The narration mentions Sayyidah Narjis went in and she brought Imam al-Hujjah. Remember this for the Masayib of Sayyidah Narjis. She brought Imam al-Hujjah. The narration mentions Imam al-Hujjah held the hand of his mother and he came out from the room, 5 years of age, his face shining like the bright moon. He held the hand of his mother and they walked towards Imam al-Askari. I remember this point. He held the hand of his mother. He came in towards his father, Imam al-Askari. The narrations mention that Imam al-Hujjah held the bowl. He sat up Imam al-Askari and he began to feed his father to quench the thirst of his father. Imam al-Askari took a sip. He took a second sip and then tears began to roll down his eyes. I say, Maulana Abba Muhammad Imam al-Askari, how blessed are you in your final moments when you were thirsty. Your son Imam al-Hujjah quenched your thirst. Wa musibata, but your grandfather in Karbala, Ya Abba Abdullah, who was there to quench the thirst of Imam al-Hussein. Ya Imam al-Askari, when Imam al-Hussein in his final moments of death, he was thirsty like you, but there was no one to bring any water. Rather, Abba Abdullah was on the plains of Karbala. This one kicking him on the chest, this one striking him with a sword on the shoulder. And as the enemy circled around him, Imam al-Hussein looking between the enemies, he can see in the distance Zainab. Allah, he can see in the distance Zainab. Zainab is holding her head. She's crying out, Ya Allah. And behind Zainab, the children are crying, Al-Atash. This one is crying, where is my uncle Abbas? Allah, Allah, Ya Shiat al-Muhammad, Ya Shiat al-Muhammad. Tonight participate in the grief of Imam al-Hujjah with your tears. The narrations mention Imam al-Hujjah quenches the thirst of Imam Hasan al-Askari, and then he lays the head of Imam al-Askari on his chest. Imam Hasan al-Askari begins to give the final wasiyah to Imam al-Hujjah. He appoints him as the Imam, he gives him the Dhul Fiqar, he gives him the Mus'haf of Amir al-Mu'mineen, he gives him the Mus'haf of Sayyidah Fatimah al-Zahra. He then passes on the Aqiq ring. He then passes on the Ismul A'zam to Imam al-Hujjah. Allah, Allah, Ya Shiat al-Muhammad. The final moments of Imam Hasan al-Askari. Do you know what the final words of Imam al-Askari were? The final wasiyah of Imam al-Askari, his head is on the chest. His head is on the chest of Imam Sahib al-Amr. Imam Sahib al-Amr, 5 years of age. Imam al-Hujjah kisses his father, Imam al-Askari, on the forehead. That sweat of death is dripping down the forehead of Imam al-Askari. The final words, Imam al-Askari looks up towards his son and he says to him, "Oh my son, you are the one who shall seek vengeance for the oppression of Ali Muhammad." He says to him, the final words of Imam al-Askari was what he was like, "My son Mahdi, you are the one who is going to seek vengeance for the Madloom in Karbala, for the blood that was shed in Karbala." Allah, which is why the narrations mention that on the zuhur of Imam al-Hujjah, when he goes to Karbala, Imam al-Hujjah will enter into the Dari of Abba Abdullah and he will come out with an infant. Allah, he will come out with Ali al-Askar's body. He will hold him up and he will say, "Oh people, if the fault was there for the elders, what was the fault of this infant?" And Allah, it is as if Imam al-Hujjah weeps till today, because when the arrow struck the neck of Ali al-Askar, do you know what the Maktal says? When the arrow pierced the neck of Ali al-Askar, he began to move his hands. ruh departs from his body. Wa imama, wa hasana, wa askariya. Imam al-Hujjah begins to give the ghusl. He begins to give the ghusl and the kafan to his father, Imam al-Askari. Allah, Allah. أعظم الله لكم الأجر يا شيعة. أعظم الله لكم الأجر يا شيعة. Imam al-Hujjah gives the ghusl and the kafan to Imam al-Askari. The people of Samarra get to know that Imam al-Askari is martyred and has become shaheed. The salat is recited over him. The people are all standing. The uncle of Imam al-Hujjah, Sayyid Ja'far, stands forward to recite the salat. And as he comes forward, the narrations mention, the companions mention a 5-year-old child with a face as radiant as the moon, as a full moon. He came walking through the crowd of the people, and then he held the Abba of his uncle, and he said, "Uncle, I am more deserving to lead the Salatul Mayyit." So Imam al-Hujjah led the Salatul Mayyit over his father, and Imam al-Askari was buried in his house next to Imam al-Hadi. As soon as the news reached Bani Abbas, this is the final part of the Masa'ib. As soon as the news reached Bani Abbas that Hasan al-Askari has a son by the name of Mahdi, and we have been searching for this Mahdi, the narrations mention that they sent an entire army into the house of Imam Hasan al-Askari. Over here, Imam al-Hujjah has gone into Ghaiba. So they raided the house of Imam Hasan al-Askari looking for the Mahdi. Do you know who they found inside the house? They found Sayyida Narjis. Allah! When they are looking for the Mahdi, who is a threat to their army, the narrations mention that they began to push around Sayyida Narjis. They began to hit Sayyida Narjis, asking her, "Where is your son, the Mahdi?" Sayyida Narjis is protecting the Imam Zaman of her time. Allah, Allah, ya Shia. I don't know what went through the heart. I don't know what went through the heart of Imam al-Mahdi. From a Ghaiba, he sees them attacking his mother, Sayyida Narjis. But I say, Maulana Sahib al-Amr, forgive me. This reminds me of your auntie Zainab. In the way that they attacked, do you know when they raided the house of Imam al-Askari, they pushed and they hit Sayyida Narjis. Do you know they imprisoned? Sayyida Narjis was put in imprisonment for years after. Allah, Allah. Sayyida Narjis, your musibah is great, and it reminds me of the musibah of Sayyida Zainab. I don't know how. Allah, Allah, I don't know how the women of Ali Muhammad will be raised on the day of judgment. But I know Sayyida Narjis will say, "Ya Allah, they imprisoned me and they hit me and they beat me." And then Sayyida Zainab will come. She will say, "Ya Allah, they whipped me on my back. They tied ropes around my hands." Allah, the women of Ali Muhammad, in which way were they treated? And then Sayyida Zahra will come. She will say, "Ya Allah, this is the ummah that broke my rib. This is the ummah that slapped me across my face." This is how the women of Ali Muhammad are raised, with bruises and beatings across their body. Matam Imam al-Askari, Matam Hussein, Matam Sayyida Zainab wa Sayyida Narjis, Ya Hussein.
احتشام زمان بابا حسن عسکری ہائے یہ کیا ہو گیا بابا حسن عسکری سوئے جینا چل بسے کون ہمارا ہے دل ہوا ٹکڑے میرا بابا حسن عسکری روتا ہوں بابا کھڑا دیجو تسلی ذرا کون رہا اب میرا بابا حسن عسکری کہتے تھے شاہ زمان بابا حسن عسکری ہائے حسن عسکری ہائے حسن عسکری ہائے حسن عسکری ہائے حسن عسکری یا حسین 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 ہائے ہائے حسین یا 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 حسین سب مل کے بیٹی کو پرسا دیجیے یا حسین یا حسین ہائے ہائے حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین ہائے ہائے حسین یا حسین یا حسین ہائے ہائے یا حسین 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 سب مل کے یا حسین 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 کے زمانے کے یا حسین 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 اے یا حسین 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 مرنے کی کرتی ہے دعا زینب پردیس میں مرنے کی
پردیس میں مرنے کی کرتی ہے دعا زینب پردیس میں مرنے کی کرتی ہے دعا زینب پردیس میں مرنے کی کرتی ہے دعا زینب کیوں کہ نہ رہی لوگوں کیونکہ نہ رہی لوگوں اب صاحب رضا زینب پردیس میں مرنے کی کرتی ہے دعا زینب پردیس میں مرنے کی کرتی ہے دعا زینب پردیس میں مرنے کی کرتی ہے دعا زینب کیے لاکھ جتن میں نے وصال عابد سے کیے لاکھ جتن میں نے وصال عابد سے ہوتی نہیں پائی ہوتی نہیں پائی لاشے سے جدا زینب پردیس میں مرنے کی کرتی ہے دعا زینب پردیس میں مرنے کی کرتی ہے دعا زینب پردیس میں مرنے کی کرتی ہے دعا زینب کیے لاکھ جتن میں نے وصال عابد سے کیے لاکھ جتن میں نے وصال عابد سے ہوتی نہیں پائی ہوتی نہیں پائی لاشے سے جدا زینب پردیس میں مرنے کی کرتی ہے دعا زینب پردیس میں مرنے کی کرتی ہے دعا زینب کیونکہ نہ رہی لوگوں کیونکہ نہ رہی لوگوں اب صاحب رضا زینب پردیس میں مرنے کی کرتی ہے دعا زینب پردیس میں مرنے کی کرتی ہے دعا زینب لیلا نے کہا روکے میں شام نہ جاؤں لیلا نے کہا روکے میں شام نہ جاؤں بے گور کفن رن بے گور کفن رن اکبر ہے پتا پردیس میں مرنے کی کرتی ہے دعا زینب 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 ہے شام غریبا کے جلتے ہوئے خیموں سے ہے شام غریبا کے چلتے ہوئے خیموں سے ان زخمی کانوں پہ ان زخمی کانوں پہ عابد کو اٹھا زینب پردیس میں مرنے کی کرتی ہے دعا 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 زینب رہی چومتی بابا کی جو خون بری کر گئے رہی چومتی بابا کی کر گئے دیو پر سینے سے دیو پر سینے سے کہ جگہ زینب پردیس میں مرنے کی کرتی ہے دعا زینب پردیس میں مرنے کی کرتی ہے دعا زینب بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے مارا 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 بابا ہر تماچے بے سکینہ نے ہر تماچے بے سکینہ نے پکارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے مارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے مارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے مارا بابا ہر تماچے بے سکینہ نے ہر تماچے بے سکینہ نے پکارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے مارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے مارا بابا آپ کے قاتل نے مارا بابا تجھے بالوں سے پکڑ گئے ہیں تماچے مارے مجھے بالوں سے پکڑ گئے ہیں تماچے مارے میں نے سر سے مانگا جو تمہارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے مارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے مارا بابا مجھے بالوں سے پکڑ گئے ہیں تماچے مارے مجھے بالوں سے پکڑ گئے ہیں تماچے مارے میں نے سر سے مانگا جو تمہارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے مارا 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 بابا جو دنیا اپنے تحفے میں مجھے بخشے تھے وہ جو دنیا اپنے تحفے میں ہمارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا وہ جو دنیا میں تو پہلے مجھے بخشے تھے وہ جو دنیا میں تو پہلے مجھے بخشے تھے ان کو بے دردی سے ظالم نے اتارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا
خولی لانا
مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا لوگ نیزہ پہ اسے دیکھوں تو دیکھوں کیسے لوگ نیزہ پہ اسے دیکھوں تو دیکھوں کیسے میرا مجھے جان سے بھی پیارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا لوگ نیزہ پہ اسے دیکھوں تو دیکھوں کیسے لوگ نیزہ پہ اسے دیکھوں تو دیکھوں کیسے تیرا سے مجھے جان سے بھی پیارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا 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 بابا ہر تماچے پہ سکینہ نے ہر تماچے پہ سکینہ نے پکارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا قید خانہ ہے سکینہ ہے ستمگاری ہے قید خانہ ہے سکینہ ہے ستمگاری ہے کیوں نہیں آتے مجھے دینے سہارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا قید خانہ ہے سکینہ ہے ستمگاری ہے قید خانہ ہے سکینہ ہے ستمگاری ہے کیوں نہیں آتے مجھے دینے سہارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا ہر تماچے پہ سکینہ نے ہر تماچے پہ سکینہ نے پکارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہمارا بابا آپ کے سینے میں آرام سے سونے والی آپ کے سینے میں آرام سے سونے والی سو کے اب خاک پہ کرتی ہے گزارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے مارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے مارا بابا آپ کے سینے میں آرام سے سونے والی آپ کے سینے میں آرام سے سونے والی سو کے اب خاک پہ کرتی ہے گزارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے مارا 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 بابا جب مجھے آپ کے السلام علیکہ یا سیدہ السلام علیکہ یا سیدہ السلام علیکہ یا سیدہ السلام علیکہ یا سیدہ الوداع الوداع سیدہ الوداع 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 سیدہ الوداع السلام علیکی یا سیدہ السلام علیکی یا سیدہ السلام علیکی یا سیدہ السلام علیکی یا سیدہ الوداع الوداع سیدہ الوداع الوداع سیدہ الوداع الوداع سیدہ الوداع الوداع سیدہ الوداع السلام علیکہ یا سیدہ 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 ہائے رنگلی جوانی اکبر دی 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 ہائے تشنہ دہانی اصغر 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 دی میری پل وچ ہوئے فنا سیدہ 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 الوداع الوداع سیدہ الوداع 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 سیدہ الوداع 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 سیدہ الوداع 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 سیدہ الوداع السلام علیکی یا سیدہ السلام علیکی یا سیدہ السلام علیکی یا سیدہ السلام علیکی یا سیدہ ہائے رنگلی جوانی اکبر دی 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 ہائے تشنہ دہانی اصغر 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 دی تیری پل وچ ہوئی فنا سیدہ تیری پل وچ ہوئی فنا سیدہ تیری پل وچ ہوئی فنا سیدہ تیری پل وچ ہوئی فنا سیدہ
الوداع الوداع سیدہ الوداع
الوداع الوداع سیدہ الوداع
الوداع الوداع سیدہ الوداع
الوداع الوداع سیدہ الوداع
السلام علیکی یا سیدہ
السلام علیکی یا سیدہ
السلام علیکی یا سیدہ
السلام علیکی یا سیدہ
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم من أعداءهم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا رسول الله. السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين وسيد المرسلين. السلام عليك